All right, so in this video, I'm going to be talking about Jordan Peterson's appearances on the H3 podcast and how Ethan Klein did a complete 180 on him afterwards. Because looking back on these podcasts, knowing how Ethan talks about Jordan now and his opinion on him, it's wild. I don't think I've ever seen somebody's opinion change this much.
Unfortunate that the rep you get is just this anti-social justice warrior, anti-feminist figure, when I actually see a lot of the stuff you're doing is really helping people, and it's way beyond that. So guys out there looking to learn something, improve your situation, check out Jordan. Today's guest is the great and wonderful and one of our all-time favorite guests, Dr. Jordan Peterson, who has graced us with his presence yet again. He has just released a new book, and this book, I've read it. I loved it. I wish you the best with the book. That's wonderful. I think it can help a lot of you guys consider picking it up.
It's always an honor when you're here.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, really. Great.
Yeah, so it's crazy to see these two go from inviting this guy on their podcast twice, telling him he's one of their favorite guests, telling him that you read his book and you think it's awesome and he's helping all these people and it's an honor to have him on the podcast. Like, to go from all that to then just relentlessly attacking this guy on your show nonstop is pretty crazy. And I'm not saying Ethan can't change his opinion on Jordan. Like, I understand if he doesn't agree with some of the stuff he says anymore and he's not a fan of his, but it just seems like you're a backstabber if you invite this guy on your podcast, you say all this nice stuff to him to his face, and then out of nowhere you just start trashing him constantly. I mean, it's not like Jordan started bad-mouthing Ethan. I think this was just completely unprovoked. I mean, Ethan doesn't agree with his politics or whatever, but I guess that's all it takes for Ethan to completely turn on you and start treating you like garbage. And it's crazy because during the Jordan Peterson podcast, Ethan kept talking about how sides like to demonize the other side and politics has become way too divisive. And now it just sounds like Ethan's talking about himself here.
That's why I call it like the cult of outrage, because it does feel more like a cult.
Of outrage.
People don't really of outrage because they're addicted to outrage, and they don't really think about if it's not rational. It's just they're possessed. I think that's a good analogy.
You get possessed.
What do you think about the political divisiveness in our country or world right now, and what steps can we take to improve the discussion between, members of the left and the right, and passionate members who, arguments between the two typically just devolve into reducing the other side to fools or even downright evil.
Yeah, right.
And now Ethan spends all day on his podcast calling Jordan Peterson evil. I mean, you can't make this shit up. This is perfect. And I'm pretty sure all these Jordan Peterson videos have more dislikes than likes, and most of the comments are just criticizing Ethan. And in these videos, he really doesn't even spend much time criticizing what Jordan has to say. And if he does, he just purposely misunderstands what he's saying. But he usually just spends most of the time making fun of Jordan for crying and calling him gay. I mean, it sounds like he's in middle school making fun of some other kid or something. It's very bizarre what's going on here. Like, it's weird that his fans always say that people are just mad at him because he's not edgy anymore and he's changed for the better and he's learned from his mistakes and all that stuff. But in terms of that, it seems like he's still just as edgy. Like this video right here of him making fun of Jordan Peterson for crying, I'm pretty sure he almost drops the F-bomb, and it's just cringy and not funny at all. Like, at least with his old videos, it took some skill and like creativity and editing and stuff. This is just him sitting here calling someone gay. Like, that's the humor here. And even H3 fans find this really cringy. Like, this is from his subreddit, and these have hundreds of upvotes. This person said, Ethan desperately trying to make us forget he had Jordan Peterson on twice. Another person said, it's really weird that they don't go into why what he said was wrong or detestable. And Ethan, as usual, immediately went into weird homophobic jokes. This sub and H3 as a whole will go on for 6 hours when someone they don't like says something similar. But when Ethan has any kind of beef with anyone, he'd immediately jumps to, LOL, are you gay? And then they also went on to talk about how they obviously aren't a fan of Jordan's and they think he's a goofball and everything. But if the guy's talking about depression and rates amongst men feeling helpless or useless, this is such a weird take to have. And obviously a lot of people agreed with these posts, so I gotta give H3 fans credit here. At least they realize how stupid Ethan sounds, especially for somebody who's always talking about how serious mental health is and depression is a real thing and you gotta take it seriously and there's nothing wrong with seeking help and all this stuff. But then whenever somebody talks about it, it's like, oh, they're gay, they're a loser for saying that, oh, they're crying about it, it's pathetic. Like, what is going on here?
To death. And
if you love men so much, why don't you have sex with one?
It's very useful to tell
he starts crying.
Everyone, not just men, that they have
you love men.
An important role to play, a necessary role, and that if they...
I sometimes fantasize about putting a penis in my mouth. I can't lie, because I love men. And it's not gay either. It's just a way of honoring men. What the world would be nothing without.
Doesn't that make you gay?
So I love men so much, sometimes I go down to the Castro.
Sucking a ding dong.
San Francisco, and I have nipple clamps on under my suit. That's a little surprise for the men. You can pick up a man and show your love to a man and just in the first moment you step in there. And he takes my nipple clamps off. And I put his on.
Yeah, so I don't know what the hell that was. And these two are just so fake, Ethan and Eli, because they'll make fun of Jordan Peterson all day long. They probably have maybe over 100 hours at this point making fun of Jordan for crying, for being mentally unstable, for taking benzos. And then after all that, they have the audacity to talk about how important mental health is and how it's okay for men to be emotional and cry sometimes. And it's just so cringy.
But you're the best man, the man that has feelings. Like, what the
No, it's
fuck
true.
are we
And also
talking
when
about?
he's like being spoken
You
to.
think she wants somebody
Say that again for the
can't
people
feel
in
anything?
back. Say that again for the people in back.
ahead.
We love men that can cry.
Bottom.
Get on to something more fun. Well, look at this crying buffoon. Waterworks is coming. Uh-oh. Oh, get it together, Jordan.
I thought the marginalized were supposed to have a voice.
Bro, this is my
Oh
fave.
my god.
The
How do you unlock this ability to cry over nothing? Like, it seems like
think-
he's crying every time now.
Yeah, he think he's just really unstable. Like I said, when I was super unstable, I would cry too much, in my opinion. I think it's just he's very emotional, not healthily. God forbid. Sitting there and crying about your own fucking suffering is beta shit, subprimal loser. Next.
And it's also hilarious. Ethan's always talking about how Jordan looks like crap now, and he's a complete mess, and he's falling apart because of the benzos and the meat diet. But this is coming from Ethan Klein, who has aged terribly. Like, if you look at him on the podcast he did with Jordan like 5 or 6 years ago, and then look at him now, he looks like he's aged 20 years. And then if you look at Jordan back then, you look at him now, he looks pretty much the same. So the projection here from Ethan is off the charts. Like, I don't know how he doesn't realize this. He just has absolutely no self-awareness. I'm glad, though, because this is comedy gold. Him sitting there looking like he's aged 20 years and he's all bloated and he's got like 3 chins, talking about how Jordan Peterson looks like crap. And then his producer does this fake laugh at Ethan's jokes. And it's just so awkward.
He could be healthy and like live a long time, but something is going deeply wrong. Like the meat, the benzos, there's just his body is not surviving well.
Yeah.
He's putting the wrong gas in the tank. You know what I mean, bro? You look like you're on hospice care, bro, and I mean that with peace and love. I'm just saying, like, just get your own life together.
Yes.
How often do you gaze upon death? Your own.
Yeah, this guy knew. This guy's reading. He sees the writing on the wall. How often do you think about death? Because it's right around the corner, bro. And we all know it. This is his effort to be like, yo, are you okay? This is how much.
His intervention.
Yeah, this is the best they can do to intervene.
And a lot of fans of Ethan's will even say he goes too far with all the benzo jokes. Like, this is a post from his subreddit, and this has 66 upvotes, and it's somebody basically saying they had to stop watching the podcast because of all the benzo jokes, because they also had a problem with them, and they said the withdrawal was like the worst thing you could imagine, and it's nothing you should joke about. But Ethan, he doesn't care. If he doesn't like somebody, he's going to make fun of whatever he wants. It doesn't matter how low it is. Like, it's pretty crazy that Ethan used to kind of be friendly with Jordan. He said all these nice things to him when he was on his podcast. And then afterwards, you know, Jordan went through a lot of stuff. His wife was diagnosed with cancer, and he was really depressed about it. He started taking benzos, and he got seriously addicted to them. And then he had a really bad withdrawal, and he almost died from it. And then he comes back and Ethan's making fun of him for it. Like, what the hell is that all about? And Ethan will do anything to rationalize it.
Ethan making fun of Jordan's benzo addiction is a new low.
Yes.
Making fun of mental health. Wow, Ethan. Do they have a point? Should we not make fun of his benzo addiction? But it's so funny that he only eats meat. Like, I mean, he's addicted to benzos, but he takes his health so seriously, and then he's shilling this meat-only diet. It's like, bro, eat some broccoli. That might help. This is a self-help guru. He's giving everyone the answers on how to live their lives.
And Ethan's surrounded by yes men, so it doesn't matter what he says. He's always going to be able to justify whatever he's doing. But then whenever somebody makes fun of him for something similar, then it's the end of the world. It's like the worst thing you could possibly do.
Or is it all those antidepressants you shove down your f***ing throat?
That one is tasteless. That one is not good. That's not a good take.
He's such an Well,
The antidepressants I shoved down my throat. That's a bad take, dude. Just shoving those antidepressants down my throat like a scumbag. Just to give you an
anybody
idea.
that makes fun of somebody taking antidepressants is
Dude,
like,
that's
you couldn't be any more sad. Like, I feel bad for you.
that one's pretty. That one's
Maybe
even.
go try some. You probably need it.
It's crazy. These people have no self-awareness at all. Basically, everything they say can always be applied back to them. It's so weird. It's almost like Ethan's making fun of himself. Like right here, he's talking about Jordan's getting more into politics and he keeps talking about political issues and stuff. And Ethan's like, why is he getting into this? This is not his thing. But yet Ethan spends all day talking about politics on his channel now. And he started a political show. And the clips for that show on his channel, I think most of the comments are negative and they're just criticizing Ethan because it was a bad idea for him to get into politics. I mean, no question about it. He's only become more bitter and angry on his podcast. I mean, if you look at the Jordan Peterson interview, he seems so much more relaxed and just rational about things and not overreacting about anything. But now, like every other day, whenever he's talking about politics, he's always just flipping out and having a meltdown, talking about how evil people are and everything. And he even used to say on his channel, like, hey, I'm not the one that should be telling you who to vote for. I'm just here trying to have fun. Like, I'm just a goofy YouTuber. I'm not looking to talk about politics or anything.
I'm just a YouTuber. How does that qualify me to tell you who to vote for? Who to fucking elect as president? I literally go to the grocery stores with 200 shirts on, and you're looking to me for advice on who to vote for president? Yeah, there are got to be better people out here to advise you on that.
And now Ethan talks about politics like every episode, and he has his own political show on his channel that doesn't really do very well because he's right. He shouldn't be the one advising people on who to vote for, and he shouldn't be talking about politics. But he thinks it's crazy that Jordan Peterson decided to get more into politics.
Jordan's my fave. I don't know what's going on with him, but he started getting into political commentary.
No.
Like people are starting to ask him about like his opinion on global warming. And now here people are asking him about his opinion on the war in Ukraine. I'm like, mother, why are you even talking about this? Do they know that your brain is basically mush from being pumped with like formaldehyde to cure your benzo addiction? I don't know, whatever they pumped in your blood over there in Ukraine.
All right, so now I'm going to get to Ethan taking down the Jordan Peterson podcast. If you remember, he put out this tweet where he said, years ago, I interviewed Jordan Peterson. Before I was very familiar with his politics, he was an interesting guest who I enjoyed sitting with, but especially now, I can see he's a dangerous gateway to the alt-right, transphobia, and COVID misinfo. I removed both interviews today. So I think he's trying to say he took it down because he doesn't want people listening to the podcast and then following Jordan and like getting caught up in the alt-right or something. But I feel like he just took it down kind of as a publicity stunt. You know, he knew it would get a lot of attention. Everybody would talk about it, and hopefully it would help his political show that he had going that's not doing very well. Like, he's just trying to think of any way to get people triggered on the right. That's basically what he tries to do now. And I don't really care if he took down the podcast. If he wants to do that, whatever. But just the reason he gives here is so stupid. Like, who the hell believes this? Because also, if he really cares about all this stuff and he's trying to protect people from falling into the alt-right or something, whatever he's trying to say here, he still has clips up from the Jordan Peterson podcast, probably because they're his most viewed clips. Like, they're some of his most viewed. But also, he has a podcast up with JonTron, who I think believes all the same stuff that Jordan does. So you can say all this about him. And then also he still has podcasts up with Chris D'Elia and all the Trisha Paytas ones. And Ethan thinks Trisha Paytas is extremely anti-Semitic now. And like she just has a lot of crazy ideas. So if you want to protect your fans from falling into these traps or like whatever he's trying to do with this Jordan Peterson thing, I feel like you would take down a lot of other podcasts as well. And also, Ethan talks about Jordan Peterson so much on his podcast now. Like, all his current fans know Jordan Peterson's deal. You know, nobody's going to stumble upon the old podcast and be like, oh, this guy's interesting. What's his deal? Like, maybe I'll start following him. They've already seen you make fun of him a billion times. It's nothing new to anybody. But, like, with Chris D'Elia, on the other hand, I don't know if Ethan's really talked about him at all. And Ethan's done 2 or 3 podcasts with him. So you could actually make a case that maybe his fans could go back and watch one of those and be like, oh, this guy's pretty funny. I like him. I'm going to follow him. And then one of Chris D'Elia DMs her and then she starts talking to him. And then they meet up or something. You could say Ethan's responsible for that. Like, if you're going to go down this whole route of like, I want to protect my fans from falling into like the alt-right or like in bad situations, whatever he's trying to say here. And then also Ethan always says that he didn't know anything about Jordan's politics. Like, he said this so many times.
I didn't know anything about him. I actually didn't know anything about his politics until much later on. I didn't know anything about his politics.
And also one time on his leftover show, Hassan asked him about it. He's like, why'd you have him on twice? Like, what was so compelling about him? And Ethan was just like, well, you know, I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know what his deal was. I didn't know anything about his politics. It was an interesting conversation, but I didn't know anything about him. And he just seems caught off guard, and then he doesn't know what to say, so then he just resorts to calling him transphobic. And Hassan's like, well, that's what you think about him now. I understand that, but what about back then? And Ethan's just trying so hard to convince his fans that he had no idea who this guy was somehow. He's just inviting random people onto his podcast. He does no research at all.
How did you feel? Like, what was it that was so captivating about him?
Okay, so first of all, when we first invited Jordan, I wasn't super familiar with him. I just saw kind of the phenomenon around him.
Yeah.
And he is a doctor. He's a psychologist of some renown. And I was like, well, you know, I'd seen him on other shows, and I thought, and then someone was like, hey, you should have this guy on. And I was like, okay, you know, I was inviting everyone on at the time. And so he was on, and we didn't talk about politics or anything. We talked about like psychology and shit like that. So I found it really interesting. Just, you know, I thought the conversation was great. It was a really interesting conversation. I didn't know anything about his politics on like, he's obviously transphobic, you know, and
yeah,
he has all kinds of, well, we've covered like, for example, recently on the podcast.
No, I know your current position on him. I'm just saying, like,
no, I thought he was very interesting from a clinical standpoint. He's really articulate. He sounds good.
So just to be clear, Ethan said he didn't know anything about Jordan the first time he had him on. He didn't know anything about his politics, anything about his views on transgender people, even though Jordan Peterson pretty much became famous for his opinion on that. But Ethan, for some reason, didn't know, even though I think he did. I mean, this clip is from the first podcast Jordan was on.
How do you feel? I know that people make this association with you because I've seen it when we have guests. Come on, we have a thread on our subreddit and people post their questions. And I've seen it before. People associate you with pandering to like white supremacists. Or worse, I've even seen the suggestion that you are a white supremacist yourself. So how do you feel about that? And that seems to be like a somewhat widely held.
And this is the first H Street podcast that Jordan was on. And Ethan admits right here that he knows it's a somewhat widely held belief that people think Jordan Peterson is a white supremacist and part of the alt-right. So clearly Ethan knew that he was very controversial, and his fans were telling him that they think he's a white supremacist. So don't you think Ethan probably looked into that a little bit? I mean, he was concerned enough to ask him about it. So I find it really hard to believe that Ethan knew nothing about him. I mean, already that's a lie, because he read some of the comments and like the thread about him before he had him on, and read that a lot of people thought he was controversial and thought he might be part of the alt-right. So he knew that. I mean, he just admitted that basically. And they did talk about politics a little bit.
Make a left-wing case for free speech. That's generally who makes the case for free speech.
That's one of the things I want to talk to you about. And by the way, I consider myself like a very left-leaning, classical, progressive person. And it's confusing because growing up, the left was always the party of free speech, I felt like. I always felt like I was on the right side of social issues. But as time has progressed since I finished college, more and more I feel alienated by my own like political identity.
Yeah,
and I find myself more in terms of free speech, like you said, the people on the right are the ones that invite you.
So for Ethan to act like he had no idea who this guy was, didn't know anything about his opinion, didn't know anything about his politics, is just insane. But he could say that because most of his fans will just believe whatever he says. Like, even if they saw these clips, they would somehow try to justify that he didn't know what was going on or something. So if you remember, after Ethan tweeted about deleting Jordan's podcast, Jordan tweeted this, and he told him he would be held to a higher and higher and soon impossible to maintain ethical standard by the very mob you currently wish to please. Then you will make a mistake and they will devour you with glee. Please take this warning seriously. I liked you. And then just a few months later, Ethan's fans cancel him because, of course, he's saying some homophobic stuff. And then he has to give this apology, which was basically just telling his fans they're too sensitive and like scolding them and telling them he's all they got. If he's not on their side, then they have nobody. I mean, this was just so pathetic. But yeah, Jordan Peterson, he predicted it, even though I think anybody could have.
Every week, we get canceled and called out. We're not woke enough. Be better. It's always be better, do better. I feel like an abused stepson sometimes. I'm getting like woke whiplash. You guys got to like understand. Every week, people are turning something we said into evidence that we are intolerant pieces of. It really makes me understand how people like Tim Pool and Steven Crowder and Dave Rubin and all these fucking goons on the right that are just vile freaks that, you know, I despise on many levels. I understand how they exist and why so many people watch them. It's because they get tired of being called racist and homophobic. There was a path that could have taken me down to Tim Pool, Dave Rubin.
Sure.
But I chose not to. But I get it, right? Because y'all, when you constantly calling people gay or homophobic and racist and shit, who mean well, maybe they're ignorant, maybe they're not like ultra woke. If you don't think me and Dan are on your team, you have no allies. There's nobody left to fight for you. Like to say, oh, you think it's okay to make that joke, but you this label of homophobic and racist. If you think me and Dan are not on your team, there's nobody on your team. We had people returning their Teddy Fresh because of the show. It's their choice. We give them a refund. I totally get it. Some of y'all think you're doing a good thing genuinely, but I actually think that a lot of what's going on is making things much, much worse. There's a genuine space for an apology and understanding and learning.
Yeah, so I don't know if you can get more confused than this. And I'm glad his fans once in a while have like some clarity and can realize that Ethan's the biggest hypocrite ever. And he just thinks because he calls other people out for being homophobic and racist and all that stuff, then that means he can get away with some of it. I mean, that's his logic here pretty much. He's like, hey, I'm the one that's on your side because I'm calling all these people out. But he'll never realize if you're going to spend so much time trying to virtue signal and calling people out for being racist and homophobic and sexist, and then you do some edgy stuff once in a while that you'd usually call other people out for, your fans are probably going to try to hold you to the same standard once in a while. And that's what they did here. And of course, he just loses it. He's like, you can't be doing this to me. I'm on your side. I call other people out for this stuff. And then he's like, now I understand why people go to the right, because they get sick of people calling him homophobic and racist. But it's like, dude, you're the one doing that. You're the one calling these people that. Like, you're setting all this up. But he'll never understand that. He'll never have any reflecting. He'll never have any self-awareness. And he's surrounded by yes men who just agree with everything he does. So I don't think he's ever changing. So the last update I have to all this is he did invite Jordan Peterson back on his podcast recently. And Jordan said he would do it if Ethan reposts the old podcast, but I doubt that'll happen. And I don't know why Jordan would want to have anything to do with him anymore. I mean, you already did his podcast twice. You're nice enough to do that. And then he just treated you like complete garbage afterwards, basically out of nowhere and for no reason. And after he said all this really nice stuff to your face. So I don't know how you could trust this guy. And I feel like Ethan blew his opportunity to talk to him again. You know, he could have probably had another interview with him or done another podcast like before he started trashing him. I mean, he could have just acted like a grown adult for once in his life and been like, you know, I don't agree with some of the stuff Jordan's saying now. Let me have him back on to talk about it and try to debate him a little bit on some of these issues. No, instead, he just resorts to calling him gay and making fun of him for crying and being addicted to benzos. So I don't know why Jordan would want to do him another favor and go back on there and talk to him. Like, that ship has sailed. But we'll see. Let me know what you guys think about it down in the comments. And if you like this video and you want to see more content like this, make sure you check out my Patreon. I'll put a link in the description. I think there are over 20 videos on there at this point, and most of them are pretty long. So there's a lot of content on there. So if you want to hear about one of the cringiest Joe Rogan episodes that not many people talk about, make sure you go check out the Patreon. There's a link in the description. And then make sure you hit the like button here, hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you at the next video.